So at this point, you've already built or decided where you're going to be formulating your strategy through your model, your framework. You've worked with your inner circle, your purpose, your strategic DNA. You've gathered all the relevant information to know where you're standing. That's the analyze portion. And now you're ready to start formulating ideas. Personally, this is the piece of our workshops and trainings that I enjoy the most, because this is where we use the most amount of different tools to work with your creative side of the brain. However, we do use tools throughout the different stages from the beginning to the very end. Now, in this stage of formulation strategies, what we first focus on, and again, this is counterintuitive for some of us that have more engineering brains, but this is first, we want to focus more on the amount of ideas more than the quality of ideas. And once that we have all of that large number of ideas, then we can start cribbing those ideas or screening through them, right? So first, in the ideation process, we'll work with tools such as creative question, the SWOT analysis. Previously, you identified the different elements in the SWOT, your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Now you do the analysis that comes with them. With sources of inspirations, we go into business model canvas innovation, continue inspiring ourselves with best practices, out of the box thinking, lateral ideas. So a lot of what happens here is around creating a large number of ideas, quantity before quality to begin with. Once you have this large number of ideas, then of course, you need to start working on selecting the right idea. So you use the impact versus effort matrix, for example. You follow the right strategic structure according to the model and framework that you decided to use earlier, especially the model, this piece. So what are the projects, different sub-projects, whether they include tasks or not, what are the different KPIs that you're going to be using, and everything that's still out there at this point in time, you need to validate. You need to make sure that everything is going to work. If there are any risks, to be able to identify, to have the right levers in place to make sure that you can identify risks when they come along, given they are not identified early at this point. And as a result of all this, you have the strategies that you're going to be following through the next stage. Remember, in our earlier videos, we said that strategies need to be adaptable, need to be flexible. So even if if you come up with some strategies at this point in time, it doesn't mean that you need to die with them. If the environment change, things change, competition change, your strategies can also adapt and can also evolve to that, right? So let's see a few examples. For example, in the business model innovation, what we try to do is identify the different areas of your business model, but then use the best in class at different areas as sources of inspiration. Like how has IKEA benefited from the improving the delegating portion? You can see how colors relate to different areas of your business model, or how can Spotify, for example, benefit from the freemium concept? And then perhaps think, well, if that's something that other companies are doing, can we also benefit with something like that? Why is it good that we can do this? Why is it also not good? Or what are some of the things that can happen there, but that we can put together and put to work? What are some of the things that we can work? Let's take this newspaper as an example, Metro. So we need to understand that there are different things, for example, that need to happen in order for this to work. So you need to have the reading audience, you need to have the publishing content, you also need to have the advertisements, and you have a free way of putting information out there. So there are a lot of things that you can take a look into. What are some other interesting companies doing? And most importantly, how can you get inspired by some of this and innovate in your own business model? So this is what happens as part of the ideation. And remember, this just connects with the last stage in the previous stage. So the last step was precisely analyzing what your business model was. Now you are not only taking that business model, but also challenging that business model, right? We've talked from the very beginning in this series of videos about creative thinking and lateral thinking, and this is put to practice in the ideation process. Now, as it says right here at the bottom, like this article in Forbes, the most valuable skill in difficult times is lateral thinking, but this does not mean that it comes natural to many of us. Luckily enough, creative thinking, lateral thinking, innovative thinking, it's something that can be learned through an organized approach. And there are different ways in which we can start putting together some of these ideas, where I'm going to mention some that that exist and that we use out there, but these are by no means all of them. So for example, some of these methods or tools have to do with contrasts. What traditional wisdom elements are ready to be contradicted? Let's say, what are the rules of the game? And then how can we break those rules? Think of a company that sells to retailers, right? And every time that a product is nearing the end of its shelf life, it just gets sent back, and a huge rebate is deducted from the accounts payable to that provider. If you're the provider, of course, you're receiving that discount. That's the rule of the game as it is. Now, can we challenge that? Is there anything that we can do against that? Now, some commercial chains, for example, they offer the possibility of saying, well, instead of us sending back everything that's nearing the end of its shelf life, let's negotiate a lifetime discount for everything that we buy, but we'll waive the nearing the end of shelf life discount, for example. Well, those kind of things, these are the rules of the game. How can we break them? This is also how PayPal came to be, for example. Hey, just thinking transactions need to be done through a bank in order for individuals to trust each other, especially if they don't know each other and they're doing business on the internet. Well, PayPal come along to challenge that and say, hey, we don't really need financial institutions every time. You can do so if you want, but there are other ways in which trust can be developed between different people in doing online transactions, for example. That's also challenging the status quo, right? So traditional wisdom elements that are ready to be contradicted, there are different techniques that we can use to do this. Combine, this is another interesting technique. There are different ways of doing this, but let me just give you an example. Uber came out to be a transport company, right? Not really trying to get the taxi industry or cab industry out of business, but being a very feasible and comfortable option for that. Now they realized, and this kind of puts co-creation also there in the equation, they realized that users started asking for Uber rides, and instead of just riding them, they would ask the Uber to go to a restaurant, ask for a dish or something, a salad, this example, and then bring it back or just take it to whatever it is. Now, Uber was fast enough to identify this opportunity, and Uber Eats came to be. So they combined the concept of transportation, passenger transportation, and delivery, and a whole new business came to be, for example. Well, that's just an example of how some things can be put together and it can be combined. Then there are also some restrictions, and I also love this concept. There is a creative question. Every time that we need to achieve something, there is also something that impedes us from achieving that. So how can we train our whole team if we have very little time and we cannot take them out of their day-to-day activities, for example, right? So there is something that you need to achieve, but there is also a limitation or a restriction that comes to it. Well, how can we challenge that restriction? How can we turn that limitation into opportunities? And here we play a game that's called How Would Your Mom Do It? And again, that's just one of the games we play. It says, well, if your mother needed to solve this issue, how would they solve it? And if, for example, we want to have a case and say, when we are from a Latin American culture, and say, well, if my mother needed me to have all the training I needed, they would probably just put a series of flashcards in my lunchbox, right? Whenever I was going to school, and in lunchtime, I would just have enough time to read them. And they say, well, that's not so far off from what we can do. Think about sticking some interesting facts and some important data on the tables so that employees can read them during lunchtime, for example. It's a simple example, but the restriction is there, but we are using different ideas to overcome that restriction, right? So how would your mom do it? Or probably how would Master Yoda do it? Or how would Al Capone do it? I don't know. There are different ways of thinking about that. Again, this is just one tool that we use. Another one is context. How can other industries, ideas, remote disciplines shed some light on our most pressing problems? Again, we have different sources of inspiration. We have a lot of examples about some other companies, what they do, some of the best practices, like, hey, Industry 4.0. Well, what's this Industry 4.0 all about? Are there any concepts there that we can also borrow and use in our advantage. For example, this material that you very likely heard of, Velcro, well, it actually was conceived by seeing how some of these seeds in some of the plants, they just seem to stick to the fur or the coats of some animals, right? And say, well, how do they make that happen so good? And then by biomimicry, which is part of putting this together in context, is a new idea was developed, for example, right? Now, with all the ideas that come through this process of ideation, we just don't want to stop there. We need to make sure that we select the right ones. So we need to use this effort and impact matrix so that we can focus on the big bets, the ones that are going to be having the highest impact. On the easy wins to begin with, the highest impact with the least amount of effort, and then also the big bets, the highest impact, but they would require more effort. So we need to select the right ones. We need to make sure that whichever ideas we're choosing, that they are formulated as smart goals, that they're specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. We need to make sure that everything is thoroughly understandable by everybody. And even when we have some of this easy wins, big bets, and even if they're in this smart model, it doesn't mean that all of them will be properly aligned. So we also need to make sure that whichever ideas or projects or initiatives we're selecting, that they are supporting one another, that there are no strategic objectives that are left behind or that are contradicted, or by achieving something, you would be actually hurting something else, or that or you also want to make sure that your different strategic objectives, they all have the right supporting elements, right? Some of them, sometimes we just, let's say, we take all the heat into some of these strategic initiatives or some of these strategic objectives, and some other ones are left behind. So we want to make sure that they are properly balanced. And with this, we can establish the right projects. With this, we are actually ready to go into the last stage, that is implementation, or how to make it work. More about this in our next video.